Welcome to the show today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We are on the road here again in California. It's so fun coming back to my once great Golden State and home state that I grew up in. And we're not in LA County, though, thankfully, because I tend to like to avoid stepping in human poop. But we are in San Diego County, and I'm out here. We just wrapped up San Diego State University for our Adolf Who, the Bloodbath of Margaret Sanger tour. And then we're doing an event as well for a wonderful pro-life ministry while we're in California. So, of course, we have to sit down with California culture warriors with the spirit of Jonathan, David, and Gideon and Elijah that publicly mock the spirit of Baal and go around trying to intentionally poke the bear in the eye to elicit a response so that people watch these legions start manifesting their truly kooky spiritual and demonic ideologies that I think more and more so we're realizing really animate so much of the American culture war and culture of death today. And so we're actually going to talk about some of those things with our guests today, Brittany Mayer and Carrie Boller. Big deals, people. Big deals. Both were Miss California. Yeah, we have two Miss Californians.
Should we wait?
Miss California on the show today. And they're going to do all their waving and all their, what is it? The, world peace. What is what's the
world
answer?
peace.
How do you solve
MAGA.
that? That's
Ultra
right.
MAGA.
Yeah, MAGA. So we have them on the show today because more than most moms and wives in America today, these two women are willing to lay down their lives and their sacred honors, to quote our founders, so that future generations can be free. They have launched a ministry and organization together called the Battle Cry in response to this culture of death. Because if you understand the nature of the fight that we're in right now, folks, you will recognize that we all need to be crying, battle, fight, rage, lay it all on the line, because none of our current culture of death happened accidentally. But more importantly, you haven't seen anything yet. If you think this culture of death in 2023 is disturbing you and concerning to you, buckle up. It can get way worse. It will get way worse until good people, and the family in particular, those that these cultural Marxists and revolutionaries and kooky pornographic addicted pedophiles have always hated. They've always hated the family. So when tyranny overplays its hand, everything becomes local in the fight for freedom, life, and liberty. Because we all have influence over the local areas where we live. You can't do a lot right now to influence the federal government in a short period of time at the local level, but you can do a lot of impact at the local level where you live. So as the battle starts to become more local in our culture of death, the family becomes that much more important. And so therefore, the ramping up in the fight against the family is going to get all the more blatant and obvious, which means we got to go back to being mama bears and papa bears, crying battle and contending with the spirit of the age and his acolytes who have always been obsessed with targeting the image of God, the Imago Dei, and the family. We're going to talk about all this and more. You're in for a treat. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. Brittany, Carrie, thanks for joining the Unaborted podcast today.
Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah.
Seth.
That
So
was
fun.
a great intro. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was fun. We just did an Instagram live together, right? And that was awesome.
Yes.
Because Brittany here, guys, is like a very viral Instagram influencer. She's got like hundreds of thousands of followers. And they were both Miss California. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Now, could you be Miss California today, do you think?
I'm
if
going
you
to
ran
go with
again
a no.
in 2023?
Hard no.
I'm going to go with
Hard
a no
no
on that one.
Because why? You believe there's two genders, you bigots.
You know what's crazy? Carrie was really the first of cancel culture.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I know this story, but a lot of people don't. So this is good. Why don't you start with each of your backgrounds? Because then people can understand how the battle cry just got launched when they understand where you guys come from. So Carrie, tell us the story behind you starting to experience the early seeds of cancel culture a few years ago.
Yeah. This was 2009. I was Miss California. I was on stage at Miss USA. Couldn't have been more proud to represent my state and my family and just who I am as a person, as a Christian. And I was asked the question that I had 30 seconds to answer. Do you believe in gay marriage? Basically is what the question was.
That's right.
And I said, I kind of started off like with the whole world peace answer. And then it was like the Holy Spirit in me was like, come on, girl. Like, you know exactly who you are. You know what you believe. You know who, the truth. Say the truth. And so I said, no offense to anybody out there, but I believe marriage is between one man and one woman. And that's the way I was raised. And that's how I think it should be, between one man and one woman.
Wow.
And I just remember looking out to the audience. I see Donald Trump in the front row. I see the cameras, the lights, everybody. Here I am. This is my moment to be Miss USA. And I just couldn't believe that it came down to that. But I have absolutely no regrets. And I know that God had chose me because he knew that I would stand for truth and that I wouldn't back down, even if it was a temporary, flimsy, tarnished crown that is now tarnished. Yours is tarnished, right? Mine's tarnished. I'm like, this thing is so yeah, that's kind of where it started. And I was one of the first to be canceled, and very proud of it. You ain't cool if you ain't canceled.
That's right. That's a good word.
She paved the way for all of us. Yeah,
I never apologized. They asked me to apologize, and I never apologized. I said I'd rather be biblically correct than politically correct.
Wow.
So I ended up losing my crown. So be it.
Good for
and here
you.
I am today.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
What a great story.
Yeah.
What I like to say is I'm with Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and
Yeah.
Barack Obama.
Oh,
on
for
this one.
sure.
I believe
Yeah.
marriage is a union of one
Yeah.
man and one woman.
Yeah.
And people go, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because these people just lick their fingers, stick it up, and see where the wind's blowing.
Even
Right.
my
All
state-
of these people
all the
defended
time.
the biblical
Right.
conjugal
Yeah.
view of marriage.
Majority
until
of people-
the culture of death said the Democrat
Yeah.
Party needs to become the trans gay party,
Yeah.
and then all of them shifted. It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only was I representing my own beliefs, but the majority of people in California, shocker, did not want gay marriage. So there you go.
well, we all remember Prop 8.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right around the
people
time.
said no.
They said
we want
no.
marriage to be the
Yep.
same. And then one judge with ties to the homosexual movement
Yep.
goes, I don't really like we the people having a voice.
Yeah.
Right. And just overturns it.
Yep.
Shocking.
Yep.
So, Brittany, what about you? What's your story? And how did you become with Carrie, the battle cry warriors?
So Carrie and I have been friends for, I always say, longer than I've known my husband. And my husband was my teenage sweetheart.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
20
that's
plus
awesome.
years.
And I was hanging out with your husband the other day. We were smoking
you guys
stogies.
are smoking cigars. I love it. I know you guys are brothers from another mother, kind of like me and Carrie.
Yeah.
So Carrie and I go way back. We obviously have a history. I was Miss California a few years before she was.
Yeah.
And I wasn't canceled because we weren't on the precipice of cancel culture yet.
Yeah.
And then
Crazy.
I am now a homeschooling mom and really never wanted the lights, camera, action after Miss California. I moved to Africa. I did missions work out there.
Oh, wow.
And turned
Oh, cool.
down a ton of huge contracts because I was like, I don't want the attention.
Yeah.
I don't like the spotlight. And here I am.
Wow.
So I feel like what I am
Good.
doing is full on obedience to the call and to the
Wait,
battle,
you
the
didn't
landscape.
want to just like have someone else raise your kids so you could
Yeah,
just
no.
like go crush it and climb the corporate ladder?
And I had every opportunity
Yeah.
to. No, because I experienced that world, I see the value of the nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
And so my like rise to viral fame was through COVID, ironically, when the world was saying you had to do groupthink and you had to walk lockstep. I started questioning the narrative that was coming out, and really where everything changed for me was I had this little homeschool account called Rooted Wings, and it was very small, and the data started coming in from Italy and on COVID.
2020.
Yes, and I was like, something isn't adding up.
Oh,
Like
Rooted
our-
Wings wasn't a like
No, we were a homeschool account.
a massive thing
Oh,
in
it's small.
2020.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Super small. And so I started questioning it and saying something's not adding up. And I started putting out information and that went against the narrative that we were told, the stay home, wear a mask when you sing in church, all that. And that people just started latching onto it. They were so hungry for truth and for something
it was
other
hard to
than what we
find
were
it
being
anywhere.
force fed.
Yeah.
And so that kind of pushes us to just a few months ago when Battle Cry launched was actually because of the whole YMCA incident in
Yeah.
San Diego that went viral.
So why don't you tell people what happened?
Yeah, so we had a little girl down in San Diego who was getting out of the
Shower.
Yeah, and she
17.
17, and she saw a naked man in the locker room, and she went to the front desk and said, "Hey, there's a problem," and the front desk said, "It's actually your problem. You're the problem."
That's right.
And
I remember
She
that.
hid in the shower.
When was this?
This just happened like
a few months
a
ago.
few months ago.
And so we
Right
showed up.
before Christmas or 2023?
Oh, this is
Oh
just
no,
like
just
a few
like
months
a few
ago.
months ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like February, I think.
So Carrie and I went down there, and what was probably our turning point was we went down to the city council and to defend her and to defend her honor and her right as a woman to have sacred spaces that are women's spaces. And we were met with such hostility. It was Carrie and myself in a room of just the demonic.
Yeah, it was pretty dark.
It was very dark,
Yeah.
pretty intense. And that was our coming to where we said this is a much bigger deal than just an isolated incident.
Yeah.
And
we have to do something.
We have to do something. So we founded the Battle Cry with our friend Melissa.
So that was
that was
birth
it.
was
That was the
birthed out of
launching
that
point.
event.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was born out of the spirit as mothers where we see what is at stake for our children's future and saying this is no longer acceptable and it's not okay any longer to hide behind giants and think that they can do our bidding and they can fight for us. Like it is time to get everyone on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And this was a meeting?
At the city council?
It was a city council. That's what it was. So San Diego?
And the man showed up to that meeting, Seth. And guess what he said? I have every right to be in that women's locker room. I am a woman.
I'm a
I am
grandmother.
a grandmother. You're just like, are we living in hell?
And let's be honest, it's a guy in a dress. So
Yes.
that's what we're dealing with here. It's a guy wearing a dress who says he has every right to access.
The compassionate thing to do is to put him
And
in an
extra brownie
institution.
points,
Yes.
Seth, if you cut your penis off.
Yeah.
Extra brownie points.
Yeah,
you
that's
get
right.
extra credit.
Yeah, yeah.
Extra privilege. We
Yeah,
call
yeah,
it
yeah.
trans
Yeah,
privilege.
yeah. Well, I don't think Will Thomas has gone all the way yet.
No, well, he hadn't as of when Riley said he was exposing himself with his full on.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, so when he does cut it off, it's like extra credit. Like, oh, then he's really legit. Like, then he's really
It's
crazy.
even more terrifying.
Yeah, I'm like, so,
And
yeah.
so what does the battle cry exist to do? What's 3 women co-founding the organization, and what are you guys trying to accomplish? What's the mission and vision of the battle cry?
I would say ultimately it is to redirect America's ship, that we see that it has run so off course and that the ideologies that really were planted in the 1940s, we'll get into Alfred Kinsey and John Money and Margaret Sanger and all of that. It really started to redirect America's guiding light, the North Star.
Right.
And so we're saying we are the canary in the coal mine and saying we see that we're going to sink this ship if we don't recorrect. And there is a battle raging, and if we don't fight it now, our children are going to be left with the carnage, and there won't be an America anymore. And so we are not only sounding the alarm bell, but our passion is to educate, empower, and activate people to get really comfortable being uncomfortable.
And get loud.
I always say that, to
Get
get
loud about it.
comfortable being
Yeah.
uncomfortable, because we've been so comfortable for so long. And we as Christians in particular, seemingly in America, we look at the wickedness and we whine and complain about it. We decry it sometimes even. Maybe we even do critique the culture of death and the spirit of the age to a certain extent. But when the calling comes, the trumpet is blown, the troops are called to the front lines.
Yeah, the soldiers are.
And then you run to that front line, and I run to that front line, and Jack Hibbs
There's
and Rob
only a
McCoy
couple
run
of
to
us.
that front line, and
There's
then we
just
look
a few.
around and we go, wait, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, where's everybody else?
Where is the blood-bought bride of Christ?
Yeah,
Yes.
come on.
What is
Thank
going
you,
on?
That's it.
Oh, but
Thank
no,
you.
guys, you see, I preach a Sanctity of Life pro-life sermon once a
Come
year,
on.
This
and I
is
give
it.
the Pregnancy Resource Center
Yeah.
director 5 minutes to share about her ministry once a year.
Yes.
Oh, and you know what we did? We did a special Tuesday evening thing that wasn't a normal service, and so hardly anyone came. But we let Brittany and Carrie talk about the seeds of the comprehensive sexuality education movement, and 20 people came, and it was really good for the culture of our church. And so and we even made a donation to Live Action. And so what are you talking about? But I think what we have to say is that most of these nonprofit organizations that are doing really good work, so whether it's either to stop sex trafficking, right? I love Robbie and Landon Starbuck, right?
Yes, love
or
them.
if it's to ensure parental rights in education, if it's to stop the murder of the preborn, if it's to ensure that laws are based on the fact that there are 2 genders,
Yes.
all of the different ministries that often do a lot of the legwork for this stuff.
Yes.
Those ministries exist in the gap left open by the church.
Come on.
Yes.
That is
We have way too many
huge indictment on the
501c3s.
church.
Thank
We have
you,
way
Seth.
too many 501c3s. And I'm saying this as the CEO of a new 501c3.
Yes.
So I understand the need for them, but what I'm saying is good people get stirred on towards loving good works to do the work that the church ought
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
been doing
Yes.
the entire time.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're
But when
exactly
the church functions as an exclusive club that
Yeah.
the people come in and then they feel like they get the cotton candy and
They feel
you
good.
know, and then
they
they
want
go
fluffy Jesus.
when,
They don't
when
want
the
warrior
church,
Jesus.
But when the church operates as a club that stays within
Yeah.
and not a kingdom that goes out and shakes the
right.
gates of hell,
Yeah.
then your
Yes.
theology is completely
Yeah.
That's
completely
so
wrong.
good. That's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
So okay, so here's what we'll do. I'm going to go back to Judges 6 really fast, and then we're going to say it's the same thing today.
Okay.
And then we're going to ask you, I'm not trans. Okay, there's not multiple people here. I will ask you what you started learning and what
Yeah.
you're trying to educate the public on, because it's been the same battle the whole time.
Yep.
So let's actually not trace it back to Kinsey. I'm sorry, you will do that in a second. But as me speaking, I'm not going to trace back to Kinsey. I'm not going to trace it back to Sanger in the 1903 and 1910 revolutionary years, the halcyon years in Greenwich Village, New York, which would spawn out Roger Baldwin, for example, the founder of the ACLU. I'm not going to go back to Thomas Malthus, the first overpopulationist in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Let's go back to Judges 6. Gideon is hiding out in a cave because if you remember, the Midianites were oppressing the Israelites. So everything that the Israelites would make, they'd like thresh their wheat. The Midianites would come and take it, right? So I always say it was Bernie Sanders' democratic
Totally.
socialism.
Yes.
Right?
Totally.
You make, we take, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so because God had given them over to be ruled by those who hate them once
Yep.
again. And so Gideon goes, this sucks, frick this. I'm going to go hide out in a cave. So he's hiding out in a cave and he's threshing his own wheat. So he's a tax evader. Naughty, naughty Gideon. And then God comes to Gideon in Judges 6 and he says, mighty man of valor. And he reminds him of his identity. Now, what's Gideon thinking? Where have you been? Our grandpapas told us you were the God that brought us up out of Egypt. Where's the milk and honey? You told us you were going to deliver us from the hand of the oppressor, that we were your special chosen people. We're being ruled over by people who hate us. Everything we make get taken. Where have you been, Yahweh? Right, that's what Gideon's thinking. So then Gideon cooks God a meal, and God lights it on fire, and Gideon freaks out, and he like repents in dust and ashes. He's like, okay, you're God, I'm sorry. And then it says, and that same night, it says in Judges 6, and that same night, so it's the same conversation still. God tells Gideon, you walk out of this cave, and you go tear down that altar to Baal.
Yes.
You go take that Asherah pole over there, and you chop that thing up too. Then we'll talk. And I'm actually only barely paraphrasing. Like he'd say, go tear down. He says, tear down the altar Baal, chop up the Asherah pole. Well, Baal was the god of baby sacrifice, and Asherah was the goddess of sex, and they would worship Asherah through orgies and unbridled sexual escapades, which results 9 months later in an unwanted baby. But that's okay. Pass it through the fire
Yep.
to Baal. So the two gods of that culture are the goddess of sex and child sacrifice, which is why I say child sacrifice is the conclusion
Yeah.
of the sexual revolution, as it was in Judges 6. So it is today. The commingling, the philosophical, incestuous relationships, they're all in bed together.
Yeah.
The meeting of the sexual revolution, if it feels good, do it, right? Asherah. And then child sacrifice Baal. Those are the two gods of our culture today.
Yes.
Yeah.
This goes back a long
way.
Yep.
Long way.
Yes.
None of this culture war is new.
Yes.
So
But we like to call it progress.
we
Yeah.
see people
And it's
rise
actually archaic.
like Kinsey,
Yeah.
Yes.
like Sanger,
Yes.
like Havelock Ellis, like Wardell Pomeroy, like Lester Kirkendall,
John Money.
like John Money.
say
All
Hugh
of these
Hefner?
revolutionaries.
We say
And
Hugh
there's
Hefner.
the meeting once again
Yep.
of the titillate the masses and break down sexual mores and inhibitions
Yes.
so people can't govern themselves and they indulge every sexual appetite. And then the kill the babies. And it always goes back together once again.
Yeah.
So you guys start realizing this. You launch the battle cry in large response to kind of start answering these questions. Like, how the hell did we get here? Where did some of this come from?
We were
And that's
just-
why our organization is going to work together. But
Yes.
now,
Yes.
here's the question. start firing people up and red pilling our listeners as mama bears who are doing this not to make money, but because you can't
We don't make it up.
silent
We're losing money.
anymore. Well, yeah, they gave away all their Miss California accolades, right, to stand
We
against
might
the culture
we
of
might
death.
pawn our crowns pretty soon.
Yeah.
So there you go. So start connecting the dots. Just start telling us like the
Yeah.
conversations you guys started having
Yeah.
as moms,
So-
launching the battle cry and going, we need to wake people up to this. What did you start learning?
I mean, it kind of started with the YMCA, and then it led into this whole trans ideology cult movement that is just destroying America.
Right.
So we sat down and we said, we have to understand the history. Like, in order to win this battle, we need to know what demons we're dealing with. So we investigated the history of it, and our minds were blown.
Yeah, and
Set.
we started asking the questions that everybody else is asking, like how
did we get here?
get here?
Isn't that so good? I
Yes.
just love that. You're just moms saying like, we have to do something.
Like we're
And
not
so
gonna
we're
not
just
gonna do
gonna
the
start doing the
low hanging
legwork.
fruit. The low
Yeah.
hanging fruit is the drag shows.
the
The
Dylan
low hanging fruit is the
Mulvaney's.
Dylan Mulvaney idiots like him.
Yeah.
We're gonna go down into that freaking root and uproot it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're gonna expose it.
It's good.
Because it hates to be
Amen.
exposed.
And that's a biblical concept, right?
Yeah.
The Bible talks about
Yes.
how bad seed
Yeah.
yields a bitter harvest.
Yep.
Well, and what
So
you
what's
just
the seed? What did you guys start learning? What's the seed?
Oh.
yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
How
buckle
much
up,
time do we
everybody.
have? Buckle
Yeah.
up. So as we're asking questions like, how the heck did we
Yeah.
get here? How are drag shows? That was one of our early
Yes.
questions, actually, was like, when did drag shows become mainstream to where kids, like, we didn't remember this pre-COVID. Like,
No.
when did these, well, ironically, it was 2016 in San Francisco was the first drag story hour. And so that's really when you start to see the introduction of drag world to kids. But prior to that, it keeps going back. We're like, well, there had to have been a starting point before that. When did this ideology come into play? That leads into, now you're
Yes.
going backwards with gay marriage and like what came before gay marriage? And you keep going back and back. We landed in 1940. Right after World War II ends. Our men have been, fighting a bloody war.
The good men went away to
good
war.
men went away.
The weak men stayed home.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
dodged
yeah.
the war.
That's right.
That's right. The draft dodgers, those that were in prison. Well, while all of our good men were out fighting, you have this guy, Alfred Kinsey. And he shows up and he starts interviewing all the guys who are left behind, not our good men who are out there fighting.
Right.
And he then stratifies the research and applies it to all men in general in America. And he presents in this book that I think it lands in like 1943.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sexuality in the human
Yes.
male.
Yes. He hypothesizes, which then turns into his
Which,
theology.
by the way, when you said he interviews all these men, let's be very clear. He went into prisons and he
Yes.
interviewed pedophiles
Yes.
who were there for raping minors.
Yes.
And then he published the research and data of those sexual experiences in his book.
Yes.
And basically said this is kind of the normal sexual behavior of the
Yes.
normal American male.
Even to the extent that one of the guys he interviews is like a farm kid that ended up in jail who was obsessed with like screwing animals. And so
Yeah.
he applies that and says that's totally normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most men
Most
want to
men
screw
do.
their cows.
There are no sexual taboos. That was
Right.
actually the premise he
Right.
was operating on.
Yes.
Exactly.
He another portion of his research came from a Nazi pedophile. And so
Dr. Fritz von Bollusack.
yes, who interesting
isn't
last
that,
name.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Interesting last
Him
name.
and Wiener are friends.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
we have to talk about Wiener later. Yeah,
Bollusack's interesting because so much
By the way,
of-
sorry. We're referring to a California politician who pushes all the trans abortion stuff. His last
There's
name's
lots of
his
interesting
last name's
names.
Wiener, so
Last
it's just Providence is when God winks. It's kind of funny,
Yes.
But continue.
Yeah.
Brittany.
So this guy, this Nazi pedophile, basically committed like the most horrific war crimes
Poland.
against children in Poland. He was overseeing Poland, and he would give children the option of do these sexual acts with me or you
chambers.
face the gas chambers.
Yeah.
And we still don't know what actually ended up happening to those kids. So most likely it was like incredible war crimes. Just
Yeah, all we know is
so
that
sad.
all we know is
he
that
sent
Alfred
his
Kinsey
data.
Yeah.
received
Kinsey.
that data and
He even
encouraged the
admitted-
data.
Kinsey wanted it, and I gave it to him.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
so
gave him the data.
Kinsey just loved data.
Oh, he was
he loved
a psychopath.
Just
He loved data
published.
that upheld his
No, of course, of
theory
course.
of
His- and his
sexuality.
fetish.
data,
Fetishes.
but
Yes.
data specifically of sexual deviance. Like
Yes.
he
Yes.
loved the published recounting
Yes. Yes.
of the things that had happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
And by the way, this is not unique to some of these people. This obsession with
Yeah.
like wanting to read accounts of of sexually deviant acts. I mean, really, they're just titillating themselves. They're just getting off on it. Like, and many of these guys, like guys, don't listen to this show in the car with your kids right now, please. A lot of these guys were actually impotent, and so they were always trying to find new ways to get excited. The same thing is true of Havelock Ellis, who was England's Alfred Kinsey, who became Margaret Sanger's kind of #1 mentor and political influence. He forced his wife into lesbianism, and then forced her to recount the experiences of it to him. And then when he started sleeping with Sanger, he would write letters recounting his adventures in bed with the founder of Planned Parenthood to his wife, and eventually drove his wife insane. And Havelock Ellis has been called the father of modern social psychology, and he was England's Alfred Kinsey. So my point is this: Kinsey's obsession with like recounting sexual data.
He got off from it.
It's actually a common. It's actually a common denominator of a lot of these people.
Well, and his whole what he set out to prove was that human sexuality is no different than we're animals, because he was a wasp scientist. So he was like, we're all animals.
Yeah.
You know?
He
so
looked
a wasp
at the sexuality of the gall wasp.
Changes like human sexuality in America.
Because Darwinism,
go figure.
Brittany.
Yes,
because if we all are evolved from animals,
that's right.
We love Darwin.
Then any type of sexual act that an animal partakes in is no different in kind. And can't be judged as any more immoral than the sexual act of an animal.
So he launches this book, and all of our broken men are coming home to America, and they get home, they're exhausted.
Sounds like you've been reading Judith Reisman.
I love Judith Reisman.
Love her.
I love Judith.
So
right here.
My friend Audrey Werner was personally mentored by Judith Reisman. And I always tell Audrey, I'm so jealous, because Judith died about 3 years ago, and I never got to meet her.
We've spent many nights crying, wishing that we met Judith.
So Audrey was personally mentored by her, and so and we have a podcast coming out soon.
Yes, it's going to be so good.
It's actually with Audrey and the woman who came before her that I've been telling you about, Claire Chambers, who were the moms like you guys of their era that just were moms that started studying and going, that was Judith too.
Once you know Seth, I feel like you can't not do something. You have to do something. And I want your listeners to really listen to that and say, once I hear this,
you'll never be the same.
You'll never be the same. And you have to respond. You have to, there's a call to action to everybody listening. You can't just hear this and not let it burst you into action. You have to do something about it.
That's right. Well, it's what Wilberforce said about
exactly.
Wilberforce said, "Let it not be said of me."
Exactly.
That I was silent when they needed
Bonhoeffer is a great example.
Don't be a dead end. Don't let it dead end with you.
So Kinsey releases this book.
So you two are studying all this stuff.
So Kinsey releases this. He drops it like a bomb on America right after we end war. So did the war really ever end? Because it comes like a bomb when our men are broken coming home. And it basically says, hey, this is the new America. You just came home from war ravaged. Like, let me introduce you to the new landscape of America. You have the beginning of the sexual revolution. The boundary lines have forever been changed and altered because some wasp scientist with deviant, like grotesque fetishes. Tell him about the table that he presented.
I mean, it's
table 34.
Table 34 right here. I mean, you look at 5-month-olds. I mean, he had these pedophiles giving him this information. I mean, this is still in the vault at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University.
That's right.
We are going to be demanding that Indiana University, the Kinsey Institute, gets torn down. That is built on abuse, fraud, and pedophile, like disgusting. I mean, you hear this stuff.
Some of the
5-month-olds.
most wicked things you could think
of.
Demonic. Go ahead and explain table 34 for people.
I want to
I talked about it probably a year ago on the podcast.
Listening,
go for it.
This is stuff that is so demonic and so evil, but we have to expose this.
And I think people need to know that this is what launches the new America. This table that Carrie is going to tell you, this is what puts everything in your kids' into motion.
Sex ed into your kids' schools.
That links to what your children are learning.
So
today.
5-month-olds, they did a 5-month-old, 11-month-old, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, all the way up to 11-year-olds, and they timed the orgasms in a 24-hour period. This is horrific. I mean, an 11-month-old had 10 orgasms in, get this, a 1-hour period.
Yeah, and they claimed that the children derived pleasure.
This is
from their
so...
rape
And let's caveat that what they said was
And
pleasure
just to be
was
clear, Kinsey, we don't think that Kinsey was actually doing this
No.
himself. He probably did
He
do some
had
of
Rex-
this stuff,
Oh, for sure,
but
yeah.
we don't have a
we
smoking
have
gun.
Rex King,
But-
who was his right hand guy.
But he was interviewing pedophiles
Yes.
who were in prison for life for rape.
Yes.
And he was going into prisons and
Yes.
saying, so tell me about what you did to these children. And that's where that data comes from.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. And it says, begins rhythmic pelvic thrusts, becomes tense as climax approaches, is thrown into convulsive action, often with violent arm and leg movements, sometimes with weeping at the moment of climax.
Yeah,
Like-
they thought that the child screaming was proof that the children derived pleasure. That's what Kinsey took away from that.
After climax, the child loses erection quickly and subsides into the calm and peace that typically follows adult orgasm.
Yep.
Like, once you see this,
Yep.
you have to do something about it.
Yeah, that's right.
So then to follow up with
And the
that,
reason why what they're saying so is important, guys, is because this is not just like an isolated kooky individual.
No.
You need to understand what Carrie and Brittany just told you, and we don't have time to build out all the connections for you on a 45-minute podcast episode. But when you start looking at all of the sex ed in America,
Yes.
when you start looking at like sexual counseling for like married couples
Yeah.
that
Yes.
like talk about like sex therapy and all this stuff, when you
Yeah.
look at Christian books
Yeah.
on like sex ed or on sexual counseling or therapy,
When you
once
look at gender ideology,
gender ideology,
Yeah.
all of the citations, so like all
Yes,
of the
the
social
science. It all comes from this.
that bolsters the
Yeah.
claims of even
Yes.
Christians writing books
Yeah.
about sexuality.
Yeah.
It's not just in the culture
Yeah.
of death.
No.
It's in the church. When you go to the works cited,
Yeah.
you start going to the citations.
Yes.
Almost without exception,
Yeah.
most of the mainstream sex ed narratives, comprehensive sexuality education, sexual therapy, sexual counseling, all of this stuff can be traced back to the fraudulent
yes, abuse.
abuse and research of
Yeah.
fraudulent
From
social
pedophiles.
science that goes back
Yeah.
almost without exclusion,
yeah.
exception to Kinsey,
Yes.
the
Yes.
Institute for Sex Research,
Yes.
William and Masters,
Yes.
and some of these other kooky people that he
Harry
hired, that Hugh
Benjamin and
Hefner
John Money.
hired. It all goes back to some of these kooky, demonic high priests of
Yeah.
humanism. So that's why everyone listening, that's why like when Carrie starts
Yeah.
crying and when we're reading this stuff, this is not just
sorry.
like an isolated, kooky, weird individual that, Carrie and Brittany, they're just trying to rile up the base. They're
Right.
just trying to like piss people off. No. We're saying that like most of the science that's been used to bolster our
What we're
culture
seeing
of death,
today.
it traces back
It
to the
traces
Institute
back
for
to
Sex
that.
Research at
Yeah.
Indiana University, later renamed the Kinsey Institute when he
Yes,
died.
and I
Yes.
think that
Sorry.
it's really important to let your listeners know that the whole goal of Alfred Kinsey was to show that any boundaries on sex are socially constructed, that
That's
there
right.
is no moral right or wrong, and not only that, but people are sexual from
birth.
birth. That is insanely important because that's what progressively
Yes.
moves into our curriculum that our kids sit under. The reason why your kids are sitting in comprehensive sex ed now is because Kinsey said they're sexual from birth. So that's why a kindergartner needs
And
to
so
learn.
if they are, they have sexual rights to sexual pleasure,
because
Yes,
it goes beyond. That is the
exactly.
next
which
step.
is why the
Yeah.
UN just came out
Absolutely.
and said, even if it's not technically legal,
Uh-huh.
okay, maybe it's not reflected in the laws, consent can still happen
Mm-hmm.
between minors and adults when it
That's
comes
the
to
goal.
sexual acts. And did you guys know that the UN endorsed the Kinsey Institute in 2014?
I'm absolutely not shocked
Shocker,
by that.
right?
Disgusting.
Yeah.
So let me read you this. This is from the Kinsey report. It said, all orgasms are outlets and equal between husband and wife. Okay, there's your first one. So this is going to latch on. People are like, yeah, I agree with that. Boy and dog, man and boy, girl or baby. For there is no abnormality and no normality. Children are sexual and potentially orgasmic from birth, womb to tomb. They are unharmed by, listen, they are unharmed by incest, adult-child sex, and they often benefit thereby. You guys, our entire sexual horizon that we are living under now with the gender ideology cult started there.
Yeah.
That's where it all started. That's where it
Which
all
is
went
why
wrong.
I'm so excited to publish an episode that's coming out soon that you guys are going to help promote, because I got to sit down recently with a woman who researched for 7 years between 1970 and published this book in 77. And she knew all of that then in 71, 72, right before Roe v. Wade was decided. She knew all of that then. But most Americans don't. They don't know the depths to which this stuff goes. Did you know Kinsey once said something along the lines of the only difference between sexual pleasure and rape is whether the girl's father is home.
What? No.
Yeah, Kinsey.
Oh gosh.
So sad.
It's so awful.
Yeah.
But once you realize that was the thought pattern that changed the landscape of America post World War II, stuff starts to come into focus. So you have Alfred Kinsey throwing out all of the guardrails on sexuality. Well, what comes next? Now you have John Money enter the scene. John Money, he comes in and he starts to suggest this thing called gender role and gender identity. Have we heard that before? Well, no one had heard it before John Money enters the scene right after Kinsey, and he's inspired by Kinsey's work. He's inspired by throwing off the guardrails.
He loves Kinsey.
He loves Kinsey.
Yes.
And
that's right.
he says, well, gender roles are a social construct. And not only that, but let's take it a step further and say that gender identity is different than sex at birth. And now let's start applying that to experiments. And what if we took
Talk about this. Yep.
children and castrated them, especially little baby boys, and castrated them, and then raised these little boys as girls? Well, according to John Money's, I'm going to call it theology, it would be, he would reason that a little boy could become a girl because a gender identity is different than sex at birth. So you have this horrific experiment called the Raymer twins.
Good.
And Carrie, why don't you talk a little bit about the Raymer twins and what happened there?
Yeah, so there's these two boys. One of them, they both went in to get circumcised, and the one went in first. It was botched. The doctor totally burnt his entire penis, unfortunately. And so what happens next is the mom said, oh, no, we can't have the other twin do that, right? So they decide to take the boys to John Money. And John Money says, oh, I have the solution. Let's raise David as Brenda.
Yeah.
So David won't know that he's...
Because gender's fluid.
Exactly.
It's
So
a body.
let's
I am
just-
not my body.
Let's just make it all go away, okay? So let's just have him be raised as Brenda. So this
And never
goes
tell
on.
him that he was
Never,
born a boy.
Never. So his whole life, he knows that he's not a girl. So he goes on, lives his life, and is tormented every single day by the fact that he doesn't feel like a girl. Wow. He doesn't act like a girl. He's a boy. And so his parents, after he runs up to the stairs.
Well, let's go. I want to touch on
go
what
ahead.
was going on. So during this time where he's being transitioned, guys, into a girl.
Yeah.
And this is early America. We're talking like the 60s, 70s here.
That's right.
So as he's being transitioned into a girl and he's being forced to believe that he was never anything but a girl, he's undergoing these meetings with
John
Dr.
Money.
John
Yeah.
Money with his twin brother, who's still being raised as a boy.
That's right.
Now listen to this. During the twins' psychiatric visits with Money, and as part of his research, Raymer and his twin brother were directed to inspect one another's genitals and engage in behavior resembling sexual intercourse. Raymer claimed that much of Money's treatment involved the forced reenactment of sexual positions and motions with his brother.
So can you imagine that?
In some exercises, the brothers rehearsed missionary positions with thrusting motions, which Money justified as the rehearsal of healthy childhood sexual exploration. In his Rolling Stone interview, Raymer recalled that at least once Money photographed these exercises.
Disgusting.
Of course he did.
Now, so you have not only the trauma of absolute confusion being forced upon a baby boy under the guise of progress and really just a theory that it has been debunked, that gender and sex are different. But you also have the trauma of pedophilic sexual abuse under the care of an
Doctor.
elite, right? So you have all of this going on. Well, Money is touring saying, this is a success.
Yeah.
We raised this little boy
That's
and
right.
he's
He
a
said
girl.
this was proof.
He's functioning.
And
we
he loves
have
being a girl.
we have proven to the world that the sex you are assigned at birth and the gender are two different things.
Yeah.
And what happened to David, though?
Okay, so
So
what
sad.
happens to David?
So he finally goes up to the top of the building and decides he wants to end his life. And he says,
He's 14 years old.
I can't live this way. Like, I don't know what's wrong, but I am not a girl. And so his mom finally breaks down and she tells him, she says, "You're a boy." And unfortunately, he ends up killing himself.
Yep.
And his brother shortly thereafter.
Yep.
So that the whole gender ideology that your kids are experiencing
That's
right
where
now,
it started.
That's exactly where it started.
It was failed, and it was based on abuse and lies and fraud.
So let's just repeat that.
It was
really
never
quick.
a success.
The first transgender experiment that was used as a proxy to prove the gender, the gender ideology and fluidity of gender resulted in its first victim killing themselves because, contrary to the lies of the Gnostics, we are both body and soul. The two things are inseparable. You can't just rip a person from the bondage of their biology and then say, my body is not who I am. And when you try to do that, heartbreak and chaos ensues. But what do they say about conservatives and pro-lifers every time that godly politicians or Christians are speaking out against the gender ideology cult? What do they say? They say, if you don't let these people transition, including children, they will
They will kill themselves.
Isn't that such a weird freaking inversion? Isn't that so weird?
Yeah.
Because in reality, the first attempted transgender gender ideology experiment resulted in someone killing themselves.
Yeah.
And now they think we're so stupid that they can flip it and actually say, no. If you don't do what we did to David, if you don't chop off their penis and pump it full of cross-sex hormones, they will kill themselves.
Yeah.
The inversion of reality. It's just like 1984. 1984 all over again.
Exactly.
When Winston says, in the end, the party would declare that 2 and 2 made 5. And you would have to believe it. And it was inevitable that they should make this claim sooner or later because the logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of an external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense.
And that's why if you're still doing the pronoun patty cake, like you are basically
Pronoun patty
yeah,
cake.
like
That's what we
you
call it.
you
I'm going to call the episode that.
yeah, if you're doing that, you've already lost. So once you say
That's right. You've already
you're a
granted
she,
the premise.
You've already granted the premise. So why can't she, Sally, go into the women's locker room?
That's well
why
said.
can't she, compete in our women's sports? Why can't she do that? Stop doing that.
That's right.
Stop playing
not
patty
letting-
cake.
Because that's how they've won it through language.
Exactly.
It's a war on
Manipulating
words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So stop doing that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the leap to culture because I think it would have been different if it had just stayed in the scientific and the medical realm. If it had just stayed with Kinsey being an ideologue and it had stayed with Money doing failed experiments, then it kind of ends there. It's like this ideology that doesn't pervade culture.
Yes.
So how does it jump to culture? What was the shift that made culture so hungry to embrace what was such a failure and so based on abuse and fraud?
That's right.
Well, enter Hugh Hefner.
Yeah, that's right.
Hugh Hefner is that final
play
component
boy.
of the unholy trinity.
Right.
So his marked slogan was fornicate early, fornicate often, fornicate in every possible way. He is what brought academia, medical experimentation into culture and drove it into your living room, into your daddy's den to normalize sexual fantasies, sexual fetishes, and throwing out the guardrails of what prior to the advent of all of this junk had been a landscape of America that was very family first.
That's right.
And look at Hugh Hefner's Playboy logo. That's Kinsey's bow tie.
That's right.
Oh.
And not only that, but why is it a bunny?
Wow.
It goes back.
Why is it a
You
bunny?
know what,
do
Carrie?
bunnies do?
Nope, I have not heard that before yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
What do bunnies do?
You're teaching me now.
They hump.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All the
And
time.
what was
Wow, that's freaking gnarly.
And what was
Yeah.
Kinsey? Kinsey was a
Girl,
wasp
wow,
scientist.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
That's
he was a
exactly
wasp
right.
scientist.
Kinsey was known
Yep.
for
bow
looking
tie.
like the sort of, he would wear
Yep.
these tweed suits and this bow tie.
He
He'd look kind of
always
like
wore the bow
your
tie.
funny, kind of little bit quirky,
Yeah.
professorial
Yes.
kind of, figure.
Kind of nerdy.
Yeah, like
Kinda
a sort of,
nerdy,
and
kinda
always
cute.
had the bow tie.
Yeah.
Charming.
Oh my goodness!
So
because
that's
because
Playboy.
Hugh Hefner would be referred to for decades as Kinsey's pamphleteer.
Yes, exactly.
And in
And
1948,
that's not what he called himself. That's what other people
Oh, yeah.
referred to him as because it was so obvious. They were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're just Kinsey's
Yes.
pamphleteer from the social science to the culture."
but he also
world."
called
Exactly.
himself one of Kinsey's prophets. And in 1948, he wrote a college paper on Kinsey's report on the American male. And he relished what he believed were the purgative effects that Kinsey's work had on society. So Hugh Hefner was not this detached player in the game.
that's right.
No.
He was fully attached to
he was one of
changing
the
the
architects.
landscape of America, which now brings in the conversation of pornography and its effects and why we're seeing pornography in our child's classrooms.
Yep.
It is all connected. It was all set into motion by Alfred Kinsey.
Yeah.
It was tried by John Money, and then it bridged into culture with Hugh Hefner.
So
And Planned Parenthood.
Let me, yes, and you know, as we're winding down here because we want to respect your guys' times, we don't have time to build out all the Planned Parenthood links, but I will do that in a talk in the future.
Yes.
And we're going to work on that together. But let me do you another one. It's not just the link from the fraudulent social science of Kinsey to culture. It's also the fraudulent research of the follow the science, eugenicists and pedophilic deviants, and the bridge to law. To the
Yes.
changing of laws.
For sure.
And so
The penal code.
the American Law Institute is founded in 1923 with the express intent
Yes.
of overturning dozens of Bible-based laws that were a reflection of an imbibed Judeo-Christian worldview that were explicitly passed to protect children in the family and marriages, right? Because everyone understands that the marriage is a fundamental building
Yes.
block. The family
Yes.
is the smallest political institution.
Yeah.
So as goes the family, so goes the
Yes.
culture. And Barack Obama sounds like a based red-pilled conservative in his Father's Day message at a church in 2008,
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
like everything.
he
I don't know if
does.
you guys have read it. His
Yeah. He
2008
totally
Father's
does.
Day message.
Yeah.
You read it, and you're like, dude, you sound like a rock rib conservative.
thought it was
Am I reading
AI.
Glenn Beck?
I thought it was
or am I
AI.
reading
I
Obama?
didn't think it was
AI,
real. Yeah.
And so like we all knew this. We always said this. So the American Law Institute is passed to overturn these Bible-based laws,
Right.
that protected the family, marriage, and children. And so Alfred Kinsey's social science kind of becomes it gives the veneer of scientific credibility
Exactly.
to the necessary and inevitable changing of laws that has to happen because look at this new science that's coming in,
Yes.
and it's teaching us things we didn't know before.
And look what it's based on.
We didn't know that children were exactly, girl.
what it's
We didn't know that
based on.
children were sexual from birth. It's
Yeah.
new science. Oh, they enjoyed it.
And look at these
And
twins.
so
They
we
tried it on the twins, and oh
and
my
it
gosh, it was
failed.
a,
Wow,
but
and so that
it
means
was a success,
that
I
means
would
inevitably
say.
we have to
Yes.
change the laws.
Yes.
Now listen to this. Alan Guttmacher, the president of Planned Parenthood, okay, and the namesake of the Guttmacher Institute, he had a twin brother named Manfred Guttmacher, who was a psychiatrist and one of the primary consultants to the American Law Institute in their drafting of the Model Penal Code. So another one of those connections. The Model Penal Code was the new common law. It was to replace the common law that was built on the biblical Christian worldview to the new law with the new science. And the twin brother of the president of Planned Parenthood is the consultant psychiatrist bolstering and bringing the social science to the American Law Institute to give the veneer of academic and professorial credibility to why we must inevitably change the laws. And then
So
here's the last one,
you've
Brittany.
conquered everything,
John
including
Money.
law.
John
Yeah.
Money is identified as one of the SIECUS officials. There you go. The Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States, the first group of which other organizations would later spawn and be launched, are the very groups behind all of the writing and promotion and selling of the curriculum that is lewd and titillating pornographic content in our schools today.
So the answer to
were all on the same team?
why is my kid seeing all of this absolute garbage in curriculum in America now? Well, that's your answer.
Yeah.
It traces back. I want to go back before we wrap up real quick, Seth. I've got a few more minutes, but I want to wrap up what you started with. And it's a call to the churches.
Yes.
Because you started in Judges. And when God shows up to Gideon, he doesn't say, hey, just like preach to the crowd, your crowd, and just tell them to just behave themselves and be nice and don't offend anyone.
Yeah.
He literally is like, you go tear that ideology cult down to the
of
ground.
the other people
Come on.
group.
Yes.
Because the Midianites were doing it too.
Yes.
Yes.
So he says,
you
go
exercise
out.
a theocracy.
But what does he say? He doesn't say build a little inclusive club.
Preach to the choir.
He says you go out there and you tear that down. And that's what we're doing with Battle Cry, and what you're doing
good.
with White Rose Resistance. And what I hope more churches across America wake up to is the severity of this, that they were so intentional from 1940 on to change America as we know it, that we have got to up our game and be just as intentional to turn around and tear it down, because it says in the Bible that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Hell is trapped by a gate, and we are to go and we are to shake it to the ground, but we aren't to be the ones that are gated in a church. No. We're to go out and we are to bring the kingdom of life against the culture of death. And that's what we're so passionate about doing, and what we're inviting more churches to stand up and get loud
and get on the
against that
battlefield.
perverted cult.
Right.
Get on the battlefield.
And you know what happens the next morning when the Midianites and the Israelites wake up and their altars are all chopped up? Do you know what happens? They wake up and they go, "Hey, Joash," that's Gideon's dad. "Hey, Joash, get over here."
Yeah.
Go read it, guys. If you're listening to this, by the way, go read Judges 6. And he goes, "Your son Gideon did this. He chopped up our idols.
Yes.
Bring him out
Yeah.
so that we can kill him."
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I say that those who murder the unborn cannot be trusted to govern the born, and those who murder the unborn will one day murder you too, that is not a hyperbolic, embellishing Republican talking point. Here's Seth spouting off again. No, that was happening in Judges 6 when he chopped down their idols. They called for the heads of the righteous who were tearing down these cults and these child sacrifices. When the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States was founded, guys, their articles of incorporation are dated April 20th, 1964. And in Article 3, Paragraph G, here is from the Articles of Incorporation of SIECUS. To conduct and carry on the work of the council, not for profit, but exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. End quote.
Religious.
In the Articles of Incorporation of SIECUS, founded by Mary Calderon, the medical director for Planned Parenthood, with seed money from Hugh Hefner.
Yes.
With a board member named Wardell Pomeroy at one point, who would later be the executive director of the Kinsey Institute, who was described as part of the pro-incest lobby. So Wardell Pomeroy was defending incest, because so did Kinsey defend incest. And yet in their Articles of Incorporation, SIECUS, one of the most damaging organizations in the American culture, and yet a name that most people don't even know today, say in their Articles of Incorporation, we exist for religious purposes. So you have to ask this question. Which religion?
Which religion?
The religion of humanism.
Yes. And as soon as we start kicking God out of our schools, we take out catechism, we take off the 10 Commandments, prayer is banned, that vacancy will be filled. And you just proved it. Who's going to come in and start preaching to our kids?
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Yes.
And so where is the church?
Yep.
The church needs to rise up.
Yep. That's right.
Yep.
Or we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction.
Exactly.
And we will be held accountable.
We will.
By our grandchildren if this world's still around. Or by our Lord one day. You know, Lot's in heaven. I guess he was a righteous man, but when he was called to protect children, he gave his daughters over to the sexualized mob so that he could remain relevant.
That's so, say that again. No, because I just got chills thinking of that. That is so, I've never thought of that connection. Seth, say that again.
Yeah,
good.
So then, Brittany, you didn't listen to my White Rose Resistance sermon at Jack Hibbs. You just proved it, and now you're in trouble, and we have to talk about it.
I'm sure other people didn't either.
But, I called that message the spirit of Lot, or the spirit of Gideon.
Yes.
And so, Lot's a righteous man. The Bible calls him a righteous man. So I guess he's in heaven. But he's at the city gates. Remember when the angels come to torch San Francisco? I saw Sodom and Gomorrah, and he takes them to his home, and then it says men from all parts of the city came to Lot's house. So every part of the culture of death was descending onto the one righteous man, the one remnant maybe that was left. And does that feel like every part of the culture of death is descending onto the righteous remnant? And they say, hey, bring those men out that we might have sex with them. Right, is what it says in Genesis. And so then Lot walks up out into his front porch and he says, hey, brothers and sisters, do not do this wicked thing. So he tries to relate to the sexualized mob, like, "Hey, I'm a brother and sister like
Yeah, I
you."
know.
He calls them brothers and sisters. It's like
brother, sister, patty cake,
They're
just
trying
like
to they're trying to
pronoun patty
bang
cake.
angels.
Yeah, we're
Like
not
they're
doing
trying to bang
pronoun patty
angels.
cake.
Like they're not your brothers and
Yes.
sisters. Like
Yes.
stop trying to get crumbs from the worldly leaders so
Stop
you can keep
waving
your
your
501c3
trans flag.
status.
Stop
Yeah.
waving your
Yeah.
trans flag.
Yeah.
You're pledging allegiance to Kinsey when you do
Yeah.
that.
So he calls them brothers and sisters. But
Yeah.
then Lot, he was willing to speak the truth. And he said,
Yeah.
do not do this wicked thing. So he calls their actions wicked. Boy, do we have a lot of Christian influencers, podcasters, authors, and pastors today who will call the culture of death and their actions wicked. But then when the trumpet was blown and you were called to the front lines,
Yeah.
and this was Lot's moment to protect his family. He calls their actions wicked. And then he proves that by saying, "Here are my daughters. Have sex with them instead," he says. We have been like Lot in the American church. We have given over the posterity and future generations, and we've offered them up on a silver platter to the sexualized demonic mob that hates the family, hates children, is a cult, is an alternative religion. And we call their actions wicked, but then we give them our posterity so that we can remain relevant, keep our blue verified Instagram and Twitter check mark, and make Christianity look respectable so that they speak well of us, and so that we can be invited like Russell Moore and Tim Keller and Ned Stetzer to appear on NPR, Washington Post, and the New York Times.
That's right.
So we can get crumbs from the table of secular humanism while they throw us a little crumbs and say, "You be a good boy now.
That's right.
You keep your gospel in the churches, but don't you dare threaten our
Just stay in the
ideology
box.
and cult."
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the spirit of Lot. But apparently Lot's in heaven, right? Because he was a righteous man.
Yeah.
So I guess he made it in as if by fire. But what will be your story at the marriage supper of
That's
the Lamb?
right.
Wow.
So good.
The battle cry.
Yes.
I love it. So where can people
just getting started.
connect with you and follow what you're doing?
Yeah. So we're on Instagram. We're on Twitter.
We're on Instagram until they kick us off
Yeah.
of Instagram. So.
But we're being helpful, just like you, I'm sure. We're like, are we still on today? So at the battlecry_US. You can follow us there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And you can also go to www.thebattlecry.org.
Yep.
We have a ton of info on there. We have resources. We'll be working more with you and really just working to advocate for the kingdom of truth and life against this disgusting, perverted culture of death that has no business in America.
Yeah.
And we're going to see it. We're going to see it through to total victory.
We're going to
That's
win.
right. And so they call you Christian nationalists and the greatest and most extreme threat to freedom and democracy. That's
That's
on.
better than the
Christian.
crown that we
And if
wore
you're-
a few years
Yeah.
ago.
Amen. If you're not
Yes.
taking shots, you're not over the target.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you, girls. Thanks for coming
Thank
on.
you.
Thank you,
Seth.
Seth.
Thanks
Anytime.
Thanks for being like Gideon and Jonathan's and not
You too.
Lot's.
Yeah.
So.
You too.
Guys, thanks for tuning in to the show today. Head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Give the show a rating and review. Subscribe. Follow us on Rumble, please, because one day it's going to strike all off of YouTube. So go follow us on Rumble. If you want to join the White Rose Resistance, go to thewhiterose.life and become an ally of the resistance. Follow the Battle Cry on social media. Share their content. Oh, shoot. We didn't talk about Wiener Boy. All right. Well, we're going to do an Instagram live with them then. That's
Yes,
what we'll
let's
do.
do it.
Maybe a few days after that you hear this episode. These two Miss Californians, they went and found Wiener Boy at a golf a country club in San Diego County. They found Wiener Boy.
That's right.
The California, he's the California Democrat politician who's behind all the like transing the kids legislation.
yeah.
What's his first name?
Oh, Scott.
Scott.
So I say thank you, Scott
Scott.
Wiener, and he's behind the all the pro-abortion policies. He's always like co-sponsoring every like the most wicked new
Yes.
bill that you could imagine.
he-
Every
Every one of them.
every
He's
new
one of the
wicked
cult
bill
leaders.
in California.
Yeah,
it's like,
he's-
oh, there's Scott Wiener's name.
You know
again.
what's funny? Now, when one of those legislations hits, I am like, oh, it's a Scott bill. Like, you just know
And
now. And
sure-
you go, sure enough,
sure
there
enough.
he
It's
is.
a Wiener bill. It's a Wiener bill.
Yeah.
It's a Wiener bill.
Yeah.
So yeah, you guys got to check that video out.
Alexander Pope once said, all nature is but art unknown to thee, all chance direction which thou canst not see. Meaning, all chance
Yeah.
actually direction
Yeah,
which thou
yes.
canst not see.
Yeah.
Meaning like,
Yes.
I think God allows some of these people to be named that
Yeah.
as almost like a providential wink to
Yeah,
say,
divine
Yeah.
providence. Yeah.
wake up now.
Yes.
Do you see this?
Hello?
Which is
Yeah.
why the Polish Nazi rapist
Yeah.
that we talked about earlier, his
Ballusac.
last name is
Ballusac.
Ballusac.
Yeah.
It sounds like ball and sack.
Yeah.
Like, why do the most wicked people behind this have to have names that resemble genitalia? Like, what if that's not a coincidence?
Yeah,
And
what about
God
John
is-
Money?
God's
Based on all money.
yeah,
That's
God's
what
doing
he
a
was
providential wink to
Yes.
just say,
Yes.
dude, Come on, could I be more
know.
clear? Could I name these people something more wicked
know.
for you to wake up? Anyway, we're gonna have that on Instagram Live because they
yeah.
followed Wiener Boy around a country club in San
Brittany
Diego
was savage.
for
and
7 minutes, for
I was
10 minutes,
gangster
following
Barbie.
him.
I was gangster
7
Barbie.
minutes.
She was savage.
It was
lawyer.
fun. We do need to talk about that.
Yeah, we gotta talk about because
talk about
that's
that.
the spirit of Gideon.
That's right.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the show today. Until next week, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted.